I think we'll get started and we'll allow other attendees to join us as we move through. So for those that have just joined us, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you may be joining us from. And it's my pleasure to be able to welcome you to this webinar, a webinar for data contributors in support of the Status of Coral Reefs of the World 2025, produced by the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network and hosted by ICRI, GCRMN and the Australian Institute of Marine Science. My name's Tom Dallison, and I'm the ICRI Strategic Advisor to the International Coral Reef Initiative Secretariat, and I'm joined by my colleague Jeremy Vickart and Britta Schaffelke. So before we move into the bones of the webinar, so to speak, just some small housekeeping notes from myself, just to get things going. So the webinar will be split into two sections. So during the first section, which is predominantly presentation based, if all those that are attending, if you could please remain muted. And if you do wish to ask a question, then please use the raise the hand feature. And then the second part of the webinar, which is really focused on discussions and asking questions, then please do, again, raise your hand and we'll give you the floor to unmute and ask your question. If you're unable to unmute yourself, then please, of course, do use the chat function throughout the webinar, which will be monitored by myself, Jeremy, and Britta. And if there's any technical issues, then please also do add those into the chat. The presentations will be delivered in English. However, we're pleased to be able to provide live interpretation into both French and Spanish. And if you're unsure on how to access that, please use the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom and click the globe symbol and then select your preferred language. We recommend using a headset and microphone if possible, and especially if you're going to be asking questions, simply to support the interpretation team who are kindly joining us. The webinar will be recorded and we'll share this online via the reports dedicated webpage on the GCRMN website, which you can see on the screen. And finally, we encourage you to have your videos on, especially during the discussion session of the webinar. So as a quick overview of the agenda, so we're currently doing the welcome and the housekeeping, and then we'll move into a brief overview of the International Coral Reef Initiative, and then Britta will give us an introduction to the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, or the GCRMN. Jeremy and I will then take you through the timeline, the data integration process, storage and authorship processes for the Status of Coral Reefs of the World 2025. We'll then have a look at the current data that we have, where we are, and especially looking and identifying some data gaps. And then we'll move into an open discussion and Q&A. And we really want that session to provide a platform to be able to answer any of your burning questions that you may have, or any outstanding queries around this global report. But before I go into the overview of ICRI, I've introduced myself, but I'd like to give the floor to my two colleagues to be able to introduce themselves. So Britta, if you're happy to introduce yourself, please take the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And yeah, good morning from Australia, everybody. Hello. My name is Britta Schaffelke. I'm with the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and we have been hosting the GCRMN for a long time, and I'm the current coordinator of the GCRMN. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. I'm Jeremy Vickart. I'm the technical coordinator of the GCRMN, and I'm mostly responsible of data analysis and data integration for production of GCRMN reports.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you, Britta, for those introductions. So in the essence of time, it's my responsibility to give you a quick overview of the International Coral Reef Initiative for those of you that are not aware of what ICRI is. So ICRI is really a global partnership which is composed or comprised from both nations, governments, organizations, international governments, all brought together under one common goal, to preserve coral reefs and their related ecosystems around the world. So ICRI was founded in 1994 by 8 nations at the first CBD COP, so the Convention of Biological Diversity, noting that we've just concluded the 16th CBD COP. And those 8 nations that founded ICRI were Australia, France, Japan, Jamaica, the Philippines, Sweden, the UK, and the United States of America. So over that 30-year period, and 2024 marks ICRI's 30th anniversary, we now count 102 members, and those 8 nations has risen to 45 nations. And when we look at the coral reefs, those 45 countries account for over 75% of the world's coral reefs. So when we're talking about an international or global initiative, ICRI really does stand steadfast on the global level for coral reefs. ICRI is currently chaired by the United States of America, and we're represented by the Department of State and also NOAA, and we're implementing the 2021 to 2024 Plan of Action, Turning the Tide for Coral Reefs. However, earlier this year in September, ICRI's 38th General Meeting held in Jeddah in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, ICRI members welcomed the proposal from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to chair the initiative from 2025 through to the end of 2027. And the Kingdom will be represented by the General Organization for the Conservation of Coral Reefs and Sea Turtles in the Red Sea, or SHAMS for short. And why are we talking about ICRI? And I think it's important and sometimes not always recognized that the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network is an operational network of ICRI and was established a year after ICRI in 1995. So when we're looking at ICRI's membership, I always like to show this map, and you can see here the spread of countries that are ICRI members, and those in orange are our founding countries. But ICRI really consists of not only countries, but also non-governmental organizations, the private industry, philanthropy, finance organizations, but also global intergovernmental organizations and regional seas or regional intergovernmental organizations as well. When ICRI was founded, it was founded on 2 documents, the ICRI Call to Action and the ICRI Framework to Action, and they really set out the 4 cornerstones of ICRI in terms of where we operate and where our focus is, and really ensuring and promoting the effective management of coral reefs to ensure the development of capacity and support capacity building on a global scale, elevate and drive research and monitoring of coral reefs, and also implement review systems as well to ensure accountability, monitoring and evaluation, but also to promote adaptive management of coral reefs as well. And the role that ICRI takes is critical in terms of supporting countries, governments, and nations to implement high-level international or regional decisions for the benefit of coral reefs. And ICRI sits in this science to policy sort of level and uses its operational networks and technical committees, such as the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, to ensure that those decisions are guided by robust and sound science. So, for example, on the screen, you can see multiple indicators that ICRI developed for healthy coral reefs, which have been used by ICRI to support governments through the CBD process for the establishment or the adoption, of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So by using these indicators and using the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, ICRI can work with nations and governments and CBD parties to ensure that coral reefs are integrated at the highest level in the international agenda, at the regional level, but also at the national level as well through national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So a very quick overview of ICRI, but I'm now going to hand over to Britta to provide you with an update or an introduction, so to speak, to the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. Britta, over to you, and you should have control.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I will do the same and give you a very short overview of the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. And that is because I hope that many of you on the call will be contributing your coral reef data to that next GCRMN report, which we will introduce and talk a little bit more about. So as Tom mentioned, I'm not sure if I have control. Yes, I seem to have control. That the GCRMN was formed about 30 years ago as a network of ICRI, and it brings together coral reef scientists, coral reef monitoring practitioners, managers, and organizations, all with an interest in coral reef monitoring data, either as a producer of such data or a user of such data. And our vision statement summarizes really quite nicely what the GCRMN is about. So it's established as the core framework for collaboratively measuring and reporting of coral reef status and trends. And that's exactly what our planned 2025 report and the previous reports have been doing. And also we are hoping that the outputs from the GCRMN are authoritative and will motivate successful global action for the long-term sustainability of coral reefs and other associated ecosystems. The engine room of the GCRMN really are the 10 regional networks. So the GCRMN broke the coral reef areas of the globe into 10 kind of convenient bins, which have either one country or multiple countries, and they are representing pretty much all of the coral reef bearing countries. And that's really where the action happens. In each region, the networks operate a little bit differently, but they are really tailored to what the regional needs are. So I mentioned before that one of the main roles, apart from a knowledge exchange and network as itself role, is the production of reports. And the flagship products are those regular status of coral reefs of the world reports. They have been, in the 30-year life of the GCRMN, been published 6 times, the first in 1998 and the most recent one in 2021, which is the Status of Coral Reefs of the World 2020 report. The network also publishes other types of reports, so the regional nodes, for example, again, on a fairly regular basis, bring out regional reports. So the first picture shows the most recent East Asian coral reef status and trends reports. And at the moment in production are reports from the Pacific and from the Caribbean region. And they also will be published in 2025. And then occasionally topical reports are coming out. There could be, for example, post-bleaching assessments. They are or have been monitoring manuals. And for example, also reports from the Global Socioeconomic Monitoring Initiative, also called SOCMON, which is a part of the GCRMN. And the last picture on the right is the title page of a SOCMON manual for socioeconomic monitoring in Portuguese. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2020 report, just to set the frame for the 2025 report, which we'll be discussing afterwards. And I hope that most of you had the chance to have a look at it on the website. If you haven't, please have a look at gcrmn.net at this report, because the 2025 report will be pretty much an update of the 2020 report. And the production of that report really was a mammoth effort. It was the first quantitative analysis of a very, very large global data set. And that was only possible because members contributed data to this mammoth effort. It wouldn't have been possible without people like you on the call kind of providing their data for this analysis. So the global data set spanned from 1979 to 2019, consisted of almost 2 million observations from more than 12,000 sites. And this really implies a lot of coverage, but there's biases obviously in the data, as you would imagine. Not every coral reef in the world has a long-term monitoring program, so there are gaps in space and in time. Obviously, some data series are very short, they don't go back to the 80s, but at some sites they actually do. So we were able to aggregate those data, and I wanted to show you some of the figures from this report, so you get an kind of an indication of how the results are likely to be presented, the results hopefully you are providing data for. So in 2020, we summarized only 2 indicators. That was coral cover and algal cover. And that was really because that is kind of the lowest common denominator. Not every monitoring program collects data to a finer resolution. So while some programs actually have that finer resolution, for example, on taxonomic and community composition or growth forms of corals, or finer kind of disaggregations of algae cover, not all of the programs have it. So this was really these were the only 2 indicators that could be summarized to make sense at a global level. Jeremy will give an overview of what we're trying to do next time, where hopefully we might have the chance to get a little bit finer into that. So the trend estimates are highly aggregated, and they are produced at the global and regional scale. And by their nature, they are not presenting fine-scale differences or patterns. They are what they are. And so you can kind of get a feel for what will be presented. The graphic on the left also then was trying to kind of superimpose one of the main important drivers here, the sea surface temperature anomaly, but also the red shaded areas where periods of time when there were marine heat waves or high sea surface temperature anomaly conditions that were leading to coral bleaching. And you can see that the drop in global average coral reef cover of 14% over the last decade really coincided with that very, very hot period. So my last slide is again a screenshot from the 2020 report showing you the regional trend graphic. So in this instance, just the hard coral cover data, and that gives you an impression of where some of the time series are relatively short, whereas in some other regions, the time series are going back into the 1980s. So these best estimates of major temporal trends we have heard and found are very useful for policymakers and a general audience, but they are obviously not kind of a scientific analysis of all drivers and fine-scale patterns. But Jeremy will talk a little bit more about that, what challenges and solutions he has been developing for tackling such a gigantic data set. And with that, I will hand over to Tom and Jeremy.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Britta, for that overview and recap of the 2020 report and the processes that we previously went through. So moving on from the 2020, as Britta mentioned, the 2025 report will really seek to update the 2020 report and provide those additional years to understand the status and trends of the world's coral reefs. So I'm going to quickly provide you with a couple of slides, and I'll hand over to Jeremy for the more technical information. But and Britta, you touched on it a few times during your presentation, namely around the indicators, and whilst we'll retain the hard coral cover indicator, we're really hoping to be able to disaggregate that algal indicator further into macro, turf and coralline algae, recognizing that they play very different functional roles on coral reefs, and hopefully the data will allow us to recognize that. In addition to those benthic indicators, we're also going to supplement the data that we have with indicators of threats such as cyclonic activity, sea surface temperature anomalies, and we're also potentially looking at human population density as well. But these discussions are ongoing, and during the data collation process, we're also requesting further information on the status of protection of where the data that are being contributed were collected, and this will allow us to consider that within the models as well. And I don't think I need to stress this to everybody on the call, but this really is a critical decade for coral reefs, and by providing that update to the 2020 report, we're hoping that we can better support and guide those critical policy decisions that have been taken at the international, regional, and national levels. So in terms of the timeline, where we're at with the 2025 report. I'm sorry, music's just started playing on my headphones. Sorry about this. Okay, I'm just gonna talk for a while and then I'll sort that out when I hand over to Jeremy. My apologies. So in terms of the timeline in where we're at with the 2025 report, is that we're currently implementing the data collation process. We're aiming to have that conclude towards the end of this year, but Jeremy will go into a bit more information on that. And during this process, we're also integrating and standardizing those data as well. As we move into 2025, we'll then really pick up the data analysis side of things and run those models and start pulling out those initial results and then building through to those final and reporting results. That will run in parallel to the report production as well, the writing of that report, and also the consultation with the data contributors, the regional coordinators, and also the editorial team as well. And then hopefully in 2026, where we'll aim to launch and disseminate the global report. In terms of the content, it will of course be a lot more detailed than this simple overview, but similar to the 2020 report, we'll have a global synthesis, which is similar to the main figures that Britta presented, and then we'll move into the regional chapters, so those 10 regional chapters from the 10 GCRMN regions. And then those will be supplemented by case studies and information boxes throughout the report. So we're aiming roughly to have around about 10 or so case studies, which are currently being developed and consulted with the regional coordinators and contributors. And then importantly, recognizing the critical value and role of the GCRMN, we'll aim to summarize the main core results in the summary for policymakers. And before I hand over to Jeremy, I think it's incredibly important just to recognise that this work is only possible with the financial support from the government of Monaco, the government of Sweden, and also the Australian government and Australian Institute of Marine Science. So with that, Jeremy, I'm going to hand over to you and turn off this mysterious music that seems to be playing in my ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So regarding the data collation process, we developed two different documents, the guide for data contributors on one hand, and an updated version of the data sharing agreement that was developed for the previous 2020 GCRMN report. And the data sharing agreement can be signed with ICRI where required. Importantly, the raw data will not made publicly available and will not be shared with anyone else except us at the core team. Only model temporal trends will be published at the end alongside the report. And for the data collation process, it's possible for you to go on dedicated web page on the GCRMN website to download the two different documents and to get additional information about this process. We are working in close collaboration with the GCRMN regional coordinators and the data contributors. For the previous global report, the approach was some sort of hierarchical, where the GCRMN node coordinator were in charge of getting the data from the different contributors within the region. And then with all this data acquired, the node coordinator sent the data with the GCRMN global team for their integration and their analysis. For this new global report, we moved to a slightly different approach, probably more flexible. And the idea is to reinforce and reinvigorate the role of the node coordinator of the regions. For some of the region, it's possible to get data directly from the contributors, and for some other region, the node coordinator decided to be the main point, the focus point for the data acquisition and data collation. So we are very flexible on the data collection approach, but our idea is really to create a networks and to reinforce the role of the regions. Now, why is the data integration necessary? So, as you may know, the goal of the GCRMN is to produce robust estimates of temporal trends of major biotic categories since 1980 at the global scale and in the different GCRMN regions. To be able to do such analysis, it's necessary to have a synthetic dataset with common variable names, common taxonomic structure, and so on. But because this synthetic dataset does not exist at the global scale, it's necessary for us, the global team, to create this dataset, to build it based on the acquisition and on the combination of different individual datasets that are shared with us for the production of the GCRMN reports. And this process of collating and standardizing data is called data integration. The data integration is done based on a published workflow. This workflow has been published in a scientific article 2 years ago. And this workflow comprised 5 main steps. The first step is following the data collation, is the data standardization. Once we receive a dataset from a contributor, we standardize the dataset. So it means that we change the structure of the dataset, we rename variable names. We can also change, for example, the units, shifting from feet to meters, for example, for the depth, and so on. So we are making sure that every dataset at the end can be combined into a unique dataset. Oh, sorry. It seems that the slides are moving by themselves. Okay. And then the second step is grouping all these individual datasets together because they are now in the same format with the same structure and with the same variable names. And once we have this large dataset, we have to pass through a step called the taxonomic recategorization. This step is necessary because at this stage, all the taxonomic levels provided by the contributors are different. Some of them are going to the species level, some others are going to the family level or only at the broad categories, for example, coral, turf algae with sediment, and so on. So it's necessary for us to recategorize everything and also to check the spelling of the different categories and species name that have been provided. Because, of course, when you are working on Excel spreadsheets, it's possible for you to introduce some misspelling errors in the names. So this is why this step is necessary. Then there is a fourth step of spatial attribution, where we can assign to each monitoring site the GCRMN region, the country, and the territory. And finally, there is a step of quality checks where we control the data quality and we removed the incorrect rows, incorrect observations. The idea of this step is to avoid having some unreliable estimated trends at the end during the data analysis step that will be done further by controlling the quality of the data. For example, we can control the latitude and the longitude. We can control if the total percentage cover within a sampling unit, for example, within a transect or within a photocordua, is between 0 and 100% or not, and so on. So we have multiple quality checks to be sure that the quality is sufficient. For the data integration of bounty cover monitoring data, we have developed a GitHub repository. GitHub is a developer online platform dedicated to collaborative work and to versioning. And we are using this tool to provide all the code in open access that we are using to standardize the dataset that we receive to create this large synthetic dataset. And on the GitHub page dedicated to this repository, you can find the list of all individual datasets that have been integrated so far. Because for each individual dataset, we include a unique dataset ID, and we provide the name of the dataset alongside an hyperlink, which make it possible for people interested to know more about the data that have been included to go back to the original source of the data and to contact directly the contributors if they are interested to create a collaboration. It's important to note that the GCRMN Data Collation team is taking charge of the data integration process. So it means that you don't have to change the structure of your dataset by yourself. We can help you with this process. And regarding the data collation process, I would like to explain to you some additional, to provide you additional information. So this process is divided in 4 main steps. First, we can contact the potential contributors with the link to data sharing agreement and the guide to data contributors. Then if the data contributor is happy to contribute to the GCRMN report, he or her can send the dataset to the GCRMN data collection team with the signed data sharing agreement. Then the dataset is standardized by the GCRMN data collection team, and a unique dataset ID is associated to it by the team. And finally, we send an email to the data contributor with the name and the ID of the dataset alongside the signed data sharing agreement. In terms of data storage, the data are stored by the International Coral Reef Initiative on the Google Drive folder. This folder is restricted in terms of access, and your data will never be made publicly available unless you provide the permission to do it, or will never be shared with anyone else. There is a very restricted access to the data shared by the contributors because the network and the GCRMN is based on the trust between the contributors and the data collection team. So we are we have to make sure that this trust can be maintained over time. So the access to the synthetic dataset is only for Tom, me, and Mary Logan at Ames. And at the end, only model temporal trends resulting from the analysis will be published, and never the raw data. And finally, I would like to say some words about the authorship, because we received some comments regarding the previous approach that has been used for the 2020 GCRMN report. And now we would like to move to a modified version of the credit approach. The credit is for a contributor roles taxonomy. And the idea here is to provide the role played by the different contributors and collaborators to the production of the GCRMN report. So this document will be provided at the end of the GCRMN report. And you can find in rows the names of the contributors, and in column the different actions that were necessary to produce the GCRMN report. And this action can be, for example, data acquisition, data integration, participation to workshop, writing and review, and so on. So at the end, our goal is to make sure that the participation of all contributors to the production of the report will be appropriately acknowledged in the report. Tom, I let you continue the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that overview. And really just to supplement Jeremy's presentation and to give an update in terms of where we are at the moment, because we've been conducting this data collation process for quite a few months now. And as I previously mentioned, sort of aiming for end of the year to have the majority of the data collated. And what this allows us to do in terms of looking at the data we already have is to be able to provide an overview or a summary of where we currently are. So on the screen, you'll see a figure that has a blue bar for each GCRMN region and one for the global scale. And there is a black line which indicates the 100% mark for data that we received in 2020, or for the 2020 report, sorry. So any blue bar that extends to the right of that black line indicates that we have more data than we did for the previous global report. So we can see that for Australia, Brazil, Caribbean, East Asia Seas, Pacific, Arabian Gulf, just Perska or the Red Sea, and globally overall, we have more data than we did previously in those regions, which is excellent. It provides us with the ability to undertake more robust analyses, but also what it allows us to do is identify where we have potential gaps in our data. Now we understand the majority of the reasons for these gaps, and as indicated by Jeremy and Britta earlier, that we're working with each GCRMN region, and each GCRMN region has a range of available resources and time available to support this data collation. So each one is unique in its situation, and we're working closely with those regional coordinators. But having these maps, or these figures, sorry, allows us to better understand where we can focus some further, or focus our fairly sort of limited resources. So when we plot these data out on a map, we can see that we have sort of clear spatial regions where the data from the 2020 report is more represented than the current data. So our aim for the sort of next couple of months or so will be really on these regions to ensure that we have strong representation in the 2025 report. But not only did Jeremy and I want to sort of have a look at this spatial distribution of data, we also wanted to provide an opportunity for potential contributors to be able to explore the data that have been contributed on both on spatial and also temporal scales. So Jeremy developed this interactive map, which is available to access via the GitHub, the GCRMN DB Benthos page that Jeremy presented earlier, and I'll provide the link in the chat during the discussion session. But what it allows us to do is visualize spatially where those data are, but also understand the temporal state of those contributed data sets. So where we have more orange and yellows, we have lower sort of temporal data, but where we then move to purple and sort of darker purples, there we have our sort of long-term monitoring sites. So if we take an example and move into the Coral Triangle and take a deep dive into specifically the Wakatobi Marine National Park in Indonesia, just off Southeast Sulawesi, we can see that we can actually zoom in into a fairly small spatial scale. So here we actually have the island of Hoga and Kaladupa in the Wakatobi, and we can see that when we dive in to relatively close up, we can see the actual location of where those data were collected. And what that allows us to do, and data contributors to do, is understand that twofold: if the data that they have available has been contributed, if they've undertaken monitoring in that spatial region if those data have been contributed, but also, and importantly, if they know they have data, but then check on this map and there are no data featured on the map, then clearly those data haven't been contributed. So we're really sort of, Jeremy and I are monitoring it, but also really sort of hoping that this map will be a useful tool for those that may have data or want to check if those data are represented. And you can access the map via the QR code, or I'll put the URL into the chat in a second. So a couple more slides before we move into the discussion, but Jeremy, I'm just going to hand back over to you just to provide a very quick overview of sort of what we might do with all these data that we've been collating.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So as I told you before, the data integration is the first major step of the production of a GCRMN report. The second major step is the data analysis itself, where our goal is to produce a robust estimate of temporal trends in hard coral cover, macroalgae cover, and so on. But to be able to produce such estimates, it's necessary for us to use a model, a statistical model. Why a model is needed is because coral reef monitoring data are heterogeneous both in space and in time. So it's necessary to use a model to avoid having some trends that are representative only on monitoring sites and not on coral reef of the world, which is our goal at the end. So we are now considering two modeling approaches to estimate such temporal trends in the percentage cover of major boundary categories. The hierarchical Bayesian model on one hand. This type of model has been used for the production of the previous 2020 GCRMN report. It's a very powerful type of modeling approach. And the main strength of this type of model is its capacity to take into account the uncertainty. And as you can see on this graph here, you can see that we have more uncertainty for years where we have a few data compared to years where the number of monitoring data is more important. And the second option for us will be the machine learning model. This type of model are very interesting for their capacity to use predictors as additional data as input of the modeling framework, because you can use the value of predictors for areas where you have a very little number of monitoring sites to be able to guess the estimate for those areas where you have very few data. So in other words, the machine learning use the information of the predictors and the knowledge acquired between the observed monitoring data and the value of predictors for such sites to guess the value of the hard coral cover, for example, for areas where we have a very little number of monitoring data. However, we are still not sure of what modeling approach that will be used. We have to conduct additional tests, and this test will be done mainly early next year to compare these two modeling approaches. And it's also important to note that this type of modeling approaches can be divided in sub-models, so additional work is still needed. And contrary to the previous report, we will share the materials and methods draft section of the report alongside the preliminary results and not after. So people, including all contributors, will be able to understand how the results have been produced and what they can include, what are the limitations, and so on of the temporal trends. So it's very important for the GCRMN to get the feedback and to get the review of the contributors, because they are the people who have the strong knowledge of the state of coral reef at the local scale.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And just to finish off really before we move into the discussion side of this webinar, I just want to take a minute or so just to really emphasize the importance of this decade for coral reefs, and I think we're all very much aware of the current situation. This webinar has been delivered against the backdrop of the unprecedented fourth global bleaching event. We're now starting to receive bleaching reports from various areas in the Caribbean. And since 2020, we've been stating that these next 10 years are critical for coral reefs, and we're now halfway through, just over halfway through this decade for coral reefs, and things don't seem to be moving in the way that we would like. So I think we need to really ensure that those that are making the decisions are guided by the best available knowledge and information that we have, which really emphasizes the critical role that the GCRMN and these global reports and the regional reports can play for the future of coral reefs. And for example, one of the key things that we heard during the CBD COP16 in Cali is really a lack of resources and ability for nations to effectively monitor their natural resources, and especially coral reefs. So having something like the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network that can supply this very important information to support those decisions, I think is very much essential. And we've seen this figure on the right hand side quite a lot, and I always like to finish the presentations with this figure, and many of you will be able to see that towards the end of the temporal series we sort of see that uptick in potential hard coral cover. Now we're not entirely sure what that uptick is caused by. I will stress and underline that, but I think it makes for a quite good analogy. I think many of us would hope that in this 2025 report we will see the green arrow trajectory. Maybe a lot of us would be happy with the yellow arrow trajectory, but again, if you're a pessimist, maybe you're expecting the red sort of arrow trajectory. But I think we need to understand the status and trends of coral reefs to be able to inform and take strong and effective decisions at pace, because I think we can all agree that time is running out. But on that joyful note, that will conclude sort of the first section of the webinar, and it seems that we've got past our technical issues of slides moving on their own and phantom music playing in the background. So I'm hoping that the presentations that we've had from Britta and Jeremy have incited some questions that some of you may have for the GCRMN, for the global team, and for the production of this global report. And I see, Jenny, that you have posted a few questions in the chat. You're more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask those questions, or I'm happy to read those out for you. But just before I give anybody the floor, just a quick reminder that we do have live interpretation available. So if you have a headset available, and please ensure to speak at a fairly sort of manageable speed, just for the translators, that would be very much appreciated. So Jenny, happy to give you the floor to go with your questions. The first one.
Hi, sorry, I haven't got a headset, but hopefully you can all hear me and understand me. Thanks, that was really informative. I actually haven't contributed data since moving to Australia to the GCRMN. So haven't done this since I lived in the Caribbean. So I guess my question was, do you want replicate transect data, or do you want a mean per site? That's my first question. And then the second question was, I have time series data going back a decade that I haven't contributed. How far back do you want us to go?
Yes, thank you, Jenny, for your questions. So for the first question, we are looking for the highest resolution in terms of sampling units and in terms of taxonomy. So if you have data at the transect level or at the quadro level, they are preferable than data at the site level, average at the site level. And same if you have data at the species level, this data will be more valuable for us than data aggregated at the broad Baltic category level. So it's preferable to have data for example, Acropora than for alcohol. Yeah. And for your second question, yeah, so we are looking for data something like 1980 to today, if it's possible. If you have such data, this would be very valuable. Of course, we have very limited data from 1980 to 2000. Because monitoring programs and so on were not very developed compared to the most recent decades. So historical data are very interesting for us. Why we are not going back before 1980 is that, at least for the machine learning model, we need to have information for the predictors, and we are using satellite data for such predictors. And most of the predictors are not available before 1980s years. So it's not possible for us to create a model for data before 1980. And I think you also have an additional question regarding the funders of the monitoring programs.
Yes, actually, that's true. So, because I'm an academic, a lot of obviously all my projects have been funded by various people. Presumably, there's somewhere for us to say who funded this research, or just because I have to acknowledge them.
Yes, so usually we prefer to acknowledge contributors, so person names of people, not of organization and so on, because it's a little bit more complicated. Also because the number of organization is very important for if we take into account all the contributors at the global scales. But if it's very something important for you and which is limiting for the contribution of your data to the GCRMN, in the data sharing agreement, you will find a section where it's possible to list the special conditions associated to the use of your data. And maybe you can list the funders that must be acknowledged or cited within the report by the GCRMN. So it's something possible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for those questions, and Jeremy for your responses. And just to touch on that funding response as well, Jenny, I think it's the first time we've been asked that question in this context in terms of how can we acknowledge funders. So it's something we'll certainly take away and work out how best to do that. But as Jeremy said, I think the important point for us is to be informed of what those specificities are to ensure that we can accommodate those as best as we can. So if you still have pending questions after reviewing the data sharing agreement, feel free to reach out to us, and we're more than happy to set up a call or discuss those in more detail with you. Excellent, thank you. I see that we're a fairly small group this evening, but I'm wondering if there's any other questions from those in the chat. If you want to raise your hand, and I'm more than happy to give you the floor if anybody has any questions. If not, I have some pre-lined up. I've come prepared, but I appreciate it. It's a webinar for potential data contributors, not for us in the GCRMN. So I'm not seeing any movement on the hand side of things. So I'll dive into a couple of questions I have, but at any point, please do raise your hand and you'll be given the floor. So I guess for Jeremy and Britta, this one's for both of you really, and it's one that we had in our previous webinar, looking at more in detail about the type of data that we're interested in, and specifically also giving reference to data collected from active restoration sites. I think we're seeing an increase in restoration activity. So are people able to contribute their data from restoration sites?
Maybe I'll go first, Tom. That was a good question from last night. And just to clarify to people, we are mostly interested in long-term monitoring data of natural environments, so natural coral reef environments. Restoration sites obviously have a lot of kind of, I guess, limitations associated with them, and they're not necessarily representing a natural coral reef environment. So we are not really able to kind of add them to that data aggregation. Having said that, where monitoring is in place to monitor, for example, the success or otherwise of coral reef restoration activities, often people use a design that has reference sites. And those reference sites are obviously nearby, and they are natural coral reef environments. And so if there were data collected on the indicators of interest, they would be actually really interesting for us to include into the data series, but not from restoration sites itself. But having said that, I think that is a worldwide gap to actually have proper monitoring programs associated with reef restoration. So I don't expect there will be many cases of that, but so that you know that please don't, if possible, send us data from actual restoration sites, but just from natural coral reef environments. And maybe, Jeremy, you can kind of allude again to the length of data series. Ideally, long-term monitoring is preferable because that will give us much better data for then modeling these time trajectory estimates. But sometimes really well-designed monitoring programs have only started like 3 or 4 years ago. They still be interesting, but Jeremy, if you can maybe kind of go into more detail of, is there a minimum length of a data set? And like sometimes research projects as well do monitoring type activities as part of, for example, somebody's PhD thesis and so on, and it might only span 3 years and then finishes again. And some of those technically are very interesting as well. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Britta. So yes, by definition, monitoring is the action of repeating a surveys over time at some identical sites. But we are also interested to have one-shot data. So sites that have not been surveyed a second time or third time and so on. Because such data are also valuable for the models because they contain some information that can be used by the models to estimate the trends. And it's not a bias, so it's very interesting also to have such data. But obviously, our time in terms of data integration and standardization is limited. So we would like to avoid integrating very small data sets. So for example, if you have a data set with only 1 year data and with only 5 sites, maybe it's not really necessary for you to share this data set because it's a lot of work for us to integrating such data set. And it will not be very decisive in terms of data analysis at the end. So we are mostly looking for a slightly bigger data set. So having at least 10 sites will be some sort of the minimum, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy and Britta, and hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity sort of around those time series and also restoration monitoring as well. And I do have some additional questions, but Jenny, I've just noticed your question in the chat with respect to restoration practitioners and best practice, and I think an important note here is this is really where the GCRMN fits quite nicely under the International Coral Reef Initiative, because ICRI not only has its operational networks such as the GCRMN, but it also has its technical groups or working groups or what we call ad hoc committees. And ICRI's longest standing ad hoc committee is on restoration and adaptation. So we have a technical working group that meets about once every month or so. That is around about 30 or 40 members strong now, from colleagues from AIMS through to NOAA to Coral Reef Restoration Consortium, Coral Foundation, etc., to share best practices, share good practices, discuss latest advancements, challenges, but also develops multiple resources around coral reef restoration as well. So ICRI has a restoration hub. I'll put the link in the chat shortly. And ICRI has developed multiple guidelines and products around coral reef restoration as well. So I'll post that link in there, and I'd encourage you to head over to the restoration hub and take a look at everything that we have on there as well. Excellent. I'm still not seeing any raised hands for additional questions in in this webinar. So and until we have some, I'll crack on with sort of my pre-written questions that I have for you, Jeremy and Britta. And I think whilst we're on the topic of data, I think it's one question that we're consistently asked all the time, in terms of what are we doing with fish data? Why are we just focusing on benthic cover? What about the fishes? So I know there's big challenges and sort of steps to move forward, but maybe I think if either of you and Jeremy, maybe you can give your experience from the Caribbean as well in terms of why aren't we including fish data? What are the challenges, and what might the next 5 years or so look like for the GCRMN with fish data?
Britta, do you would like to start, or can
I maybe introduce that, but really, I mean, I would love to for you to talk about that Caribbean experience. So in 2020, there was an attempt made to include fish data. Many of the long-term monitoring programs around the world are not only collecting benthic data, but also fish data. And that is obviously very important because it does connect the benthic and coral reef monitoring to also the human dimensions of coral reefs. And so we were really hoping that the 2025 report will have an analysis of fish data, but fish data have their own methodological challenges, and Jeremy will kind of elaborate a little bit more on that. So long story short, what I was really hoping that we can aspire to, that we have to kind of leave to likely the next report for 2030, where hopefully we can crack some of those method issues and analysis issues to at least at some level be able to report on fish data. So yeah, we thought we might be able to do it, but unfortunately not. So please don't send us any fish data. But actually, after the next report, it would be really interesting to find out who is collecting those data at what level and so on and so forth, because we do want to go into an exploratory analysis phase over the next 5 years to actually do that at some stage, because it is a sore gap in what we're doing. Over to you, Jeremy, for the technical details.
Thank you, Britta. Yes, and in the same way that we do for the benthic data, it's necessary for the fish data, if you want to conduct a global analysis of fish data, to be able to conduct a data integration process as well. So you have to duplicate the time and funds necessary to produce a report if you want also to include fish data. So the first reason is a limitation of available time and funds. And the second reason is mainly related to the existence of species list by monitoring programs in charge of monitoring of fish data. Some monitoring programs on fish data are only counting commercial species. Some others are only counting, for example, herbivorous species. Some others have their own species list. So it's very difficult at the end to be able to produce a single indicator of the evolution, for example, of fish biomass over time for all coral reef, because you have this bias of difference in terms of species list, which is not the case, of course, for benthic cover data. And there are also a lot of additional biases associated to the analysis of fish data. For example, the size of the transect, of the belt transect. You have to standardize everything by the area. The natural variability of fish data is also much more important than Baltic data. So you have to take into account some the fact that the noise is usually more important for fish data, which make the detection of a trend more difficult also. So for all of these reasons, it's very difficult to analyze fish data.
Thank you very much, Jeremy and Britta. Yeah, I think it's certainly a big feat that we'll aim to tackle over the coming years, and I think everybody's super excited to see how you get on in the Caribbean. Being in that workshop in Puerto Morelos a couple of months ago, I don't think it will be plain sailing in terms of analyzing and integrating those data, but I think we're all very excited to see those outputs. And Jenny, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question on fish data collection.
Hi, I mean, I think most of us collect fish data when we're doing benthic data collection. Have you just got, like, you've got your core, the basic level, for example, hard coral cover, turf algae, macroalgae cover, crystallose coralline algae cover. Have you got an equivalent for fish? Have you got what your lowest common denominator would be if people were to contribute fish data?
It's a good question because we are just at the beginning of the process of trying to integrate fish data. We will use the Caribbean report that is currently under production as a case study of the analysis of fish data. So we will know more about this over the next few months.
I look forward to hearing more because I understand the Caribbean's a much easier system to work with because there's less species. So I'll be interested to see how that scales up to the Indo-Pacific. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny and Jeremy. This reminds me of a conversation that we've been having in the GCRMN for quite some time now, in terms of trying to look at sort of what guidance or materials or resources can the GCRMN develop to support this sort of process. And one of our conversations has been sort of going back to the English et al. Coral reef monitoring guidelines that we have, noting that things have progressed quite significantly since they first came out, but also understanding how much people still reference those guidelines and to support their work. So it's something that's sort of on our radar, but we are a fairly small team, and so it's something that we're going to be looking at maybe after we've got this small task of a global assessment out the way. Perfect. So seeing as we're talking about data, and talking about the progress that's been made around data to storage and sort of standardization, we're now aware, obviously, that the GCRMN isn't the only sort of repository or sort of assessment initiative that's looking at coral reef status and health, and we have other software such as Mermaid and Reef Cloud that are available and supporting this process. So Jeremy and Britta, feel free to jump in, especially on Reef Cloud. But how are we managing data that are either being contributed directly via Excel, for example, but over email, or those that are stored in Mermaid and Reef Cloud and potentially other softwares? Can we use those data, and what's that process for integrating those data?
Yeah, so Mermaid is an online platform dedicated to coral reef monitoring data. And we can use this platform to integrate data directly using Mermaid because they have developed an air package which make the data acquisition very, very easy. And as a contributor, you can decide the level of the aggregation of your data. So it's not mandatory for you to share the raw data. You can choose to share only the data aggregated at the site level, for example. So it's possible for us to get all the Mermaid data because they are in open access. at least for the aggregated site data. But we are very keen to have also the names of the contributors and to include the people as much as possible, because we are not only looking for data, we are also looking for the expertise of people in charge of the monitoring. Because at the end, we would like for people to review the content of the report. So we also need their expertise in addition of their data. So that's why we can use Mermaid data. It's something that we are doing, but we are looking to have the names of people in charge of the Mermaid project.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Just when we're just to sort of as we're coming to a close, I won't prolong this and keep asking pre-scripted questions. But I think what's super important is just reviewing and understanding the timeline and the sort of the process that you described, Jeremy. And I know before you responded to Jenny about the timeline or sort of how far back in the data we want to go, but considering other timelines that we need to keep to, we've mentioned about aiming towards the end of 2024 to submit data. But what about those that are, for example, as we heard earlier in the previous webinar, those that are currently undertaking in-field assessments due to the fourth global bleaching event and various localized impacts, but those data aren't yet integrated into their data sets? Can we be a little bit flexible to allow those data to come in, or are we sort of working to that hard deadline?
Yes, so in theory, we decided to put the deadline for the data collation at the end of this year. But we know that for some regions and for some contributors, because they have, for example, not yet analyzed the photo quadrats acquired in this year, we can possibly postpone the end of data collation until the end of February next year. But probably no more than that, because at some point, delaying the data collation step will delay the production of the entire GCRMN report. So the really end of the data collation will be end of next February next year.
Excellent, thank you, Jeremy.
Maybe
Yeah.
to
I was about to pass to you, Britta, so all good.
If you have a very long data set, but you're still doing some surveys, say November, December, it would be really helpful if you can already contribute the first part. So the data analysis can actually start, because as Jeremy pointed out, we will do the exploratory analysis to settle on the analysis model and also see at what level we can actually disaggregate data. So it would be really helpful to get as much as possible, as early as possible. And then if you have your last survey of the year available only in, say, January or maybe February, then that likely will be possible as well. But please think about whether you can partition your data sets and send us as much as you can already. Thank you. And I was just noting, there was a question from Victoria Moyer. Hi, I'm a PhD student. Is it possible for me to connect as well? Thanks, Victoria, for that question. That's a good one. So this webinar and also our current project for producing that 2025 global report really is about collating data that are available. So if you, as part of your PhD study, have collected monitoring data over a good period of time, and we touched on that earlier, absolutely you can contribute. If you are early in your PhD, you might actually benefit from connecting to your regional network. I don't know where you're based, and you're welcome to take the floor and talk a little bit about that. But otherwise, send us an email and we can connect you to your regional node where you might find a network of people for knowledge exchange and to tap into perhaps other people that might assist you with your PhD.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a US citizen, but I'm living in Malaysia. And so I'm getting my PhD in Malaysia. And I'm here kind of partial, like, I'm not going to include any of my data for my PhD because I'm mainly focusing on turbid and urban reefs, but I'm like the representative of the rest of the team. So I'm trying to figure out, like, can we include all our data from our protected area clear water site? So that's kind of what I'm looking at. So that's what my question was more about. I am kind of like tasked in charge of like getting that data to you guys. So that's where I'm coming in. It's not actually part of my PhD, just the moving of the data and the organizing to you.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, I might, if you could maybe drop your email, we can still connect you to the leads of the East Asia Hub, which is Tadashi Kimura and just escaped me. Anyway, Takara too. Thank you. So that's a very active hub, and I showed you the regional report from that region that just came out also a few years ago. So it would be really good to connect with those. And Karen, I think, no, she's not. She's based in Singapore, not in Malaysia, but Malaysia has been contributing very actively. So we can put you into touch if you aren't already with these people. But yeah, data from Malaysia would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
And Tom just posted the link to the East Asia Hub, which has the email addresses of the regional coordinators there. So let us know if you want to have an introduction or if you're happy to just connect yourself.
I can connect myself. I'll reach out and let them know that I got it from you guys.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. And I think that's just an important reminder from myself to everybody on the call that we do have the GCRMN website, and each region of the GCRMN has its own regional page, which includes resources produced by the region, from regional reports through to sort of more country level reports, and also it talks about the governance framework for that region and provides key contact information for those regional coordinators who are in most cases implementing sort of some coordination in the region for the provision of data. So please do go and have a look at the GCRMN website. Do explore the interactive map, which I realized I didn't post the URL in, so I will do that now. So please do go and explore the interactive map that Jeremy created, and let us know if you think we're missing any data, and that would be very much appreciated. So I think actually that brings us to quite a nice time just to sort of bring us into conclusions and wrap up. But Jeremy or Britta, if there's anything additional that you wanted to add before we move into the concluding remarks, then please do feel free to just take the floor. No? Perfect. I think Jeremy wants to go to bed. Excellent. Okay. Let's bring us into our final remarks. So today you've heard about sort of the International Coral Reef Initiative, how the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network sits under ICRI, and then the global assessments and regional assessments from the GCRMN. And we've spoken a lot about the upcoming Status of Coral Reefs of the World 2025 report, and the intricacies and challenges and sort of mechanisms that we've put in place to support that data collection. So as emphasized multiple times throughout, these global assessments really depend on the willingness and ability for those that are collecting this data to contribute to the regional and also global reports. So again, if you have data that you haven't yet contributed, know of people that may have data that may wish to contribute or learn more, then please do read further on the reports dedicated webpage. So you can see the URL on the screen. You can scan the call for data QR code if you want, and also read and download the data sharing agreement and the guide for data contributors as well. And of course, if there are any questions at all, any points that need clarifying, or you have some questions about your data or sort of the process, then please do reach out to Jeremy, myself, or Britta. I'm more than happy to assist you through this process. If you don't have any data, but have a wide network, then we would very much appreciate you sharing the call for data. We've created a Trello board as well, which has various graphics for social media and some pre-written posts on there as well. So if you're able to distribute the call for data amongst your networks, colleagues and peers, then that would be very much appreciated. Victoria, I see that your hand's up. Feel free.
I just have a quick question. If you have like a longer period of time for less than 10 sites, is that okay? Or do you need to hit the 10 sites mark? Like say you have like 15 years for a site or a few sites.
No, it's yeah. Having a long period of time and very few sites, it's something very interesting for the GCRMN. The threshold of 10 sites was mostly something informative. It's not something very mandatory. We just try to avoid including too many, very limited data sets in terms of size. But we are very open to any collaboration. So don't hesitate. We are flexible in terms of data integration. Don't hesitate to share your data.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks, Jeremy. And yeah, I think just to emphasize that point, that if there's any questions or anything, then please just do reach out to us, and more than happy to look at a sample of your data as well and provide inputs and sort of clarification points on that as well. Okay, perfect. So again, please do consider sharing the call for data as well, even if you don't have data. And very lastly, I'd just like to finish up with just a reminder of the timeline and where we are, just really stressing sort of the end of the year aim that we have. And yes, there's some flexibility in there, but again, as emphasizing Britta's point, that please don't feel like you need to hold on to all of your data and contribute it in one big go at the end. If you have data that are ready, then please do consider sharing those, and then we can supplement those with sort of the data that you're currently either heading out into the field to collect, like Jenny is next week, or that you're putting into your data sets to share. And then we'll move into the analysis, etc. next year. And again, I would like to thank the government of Monaco, the government of Sweden, and Australian government, as well as AIMS, for their financial support as well in the development of this report. And if there is anybody on the call that is interested in supporting the production of this next report, then please do reach out. More than happy to feature your logo on the report and have it on the website as well, if there's any possibility of financial support. So with that, I will thank everybody for your time. I appreciate everybody is very busy, and thank you for giving up your time to listen to us about the GCRMN, and hopefully we've answered some of your questions, and you're leaving the webinar with a bit more confidence around the process, how your data are handled, and how the report will be produced. So if you have questions, please do reach out to myself, Jeremy, Britta, or Francis, who's the global coordinator at ICRI. And with that, I wish you all a pleasant day, evening or night, depending on where you are. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.